Can I ask you a question, Mike? Who were your favorite boxers growing up?
Me growing up, Duran's number one.
Duran.
I can remember being a little boy, and Duran was fighting this guy. What was 77 probably? And the guy was giving him a hard time, and Duran hit him to the body, then pulled him to the head, knocked him out cold.
He hit the hardest. That is what Vinny Pazienza said after Roberto Duran punched him for the very first time. Not in his 20s, not in his 30s, in his mid-40s. And Pazienza, a man who had fought some of the most dangerous punchers alive, said his second thoughts kicked in right then and there. One punch. That is all it took. But here's the thing, most people do not talk about that. Most people talk about one moment, 2 words, no mas. They talk about the night Roberto Duran turned his back and walked away from Sugar Ray Leonard in New Orleans. They use those 2 words to shrink a giant. They put that moment in a box, slap a label on it, and call it the whole story. But it is not the whole story, not even close. Because while the world was laughing at him, Mike Tyson was in the stands at Madison Square Garden, 16 years old, screaming Duran's name and shadowboxing alone in the gallery. While critics were writing him off, Marvin Hagler was on the other side of a 15-round war begging the media for credit, because beating Duran was that hard. While people called him a quitter, Vinny Pazienza was getting rattled by a man in his 40s and wondering how he had gotten himself into that ring. If you are enjoying this so far, hit the hype button right now and give this video some hype. It really helps more boxing fans find it. Now let us get into the legends. This is 10 boxing legends explaining exactly how special Roberto Duran truly was. We are counting down from number 10 all the way to number 1. And by the time we get there, you are going to understand why the greatest fighters on the planet saw something in this man that the average fan never did. Number 10 is Bert Sugar. Bert Sugar was the most respected boxing historian who ever lived. He wore the fedora, he smoked the cigars, he had seen everything. And when it came to Roberto Duran, Sugar had a very specific way of describing him. He called Duran a technical brawler. Now that phrase might sound simple, but think about what it actually means. Most fighters are one or the other. You are either a brawler who throws bombs and eats punches, or you are a technician who picks your spots and stays clean. Duran was both at the same time. Sugar said his raw power was always backed by a deep understanding of the sport's mechanics. He was not just swinging, he was thinking. Sugar described him as a throwback to the golden era of the 1920s and 1930s, a time when men knew how to fight on the inside and make every inch of space count. He was a legend recognized by every corner of the boxing world, every background, every demographic. That kind of universal respect does not come easy. It has to be earned, punch by punch, fight by fight. Number 9 is Thomas Hearns. Thomas Hearns was called the Hitman. He had arms that seemed to go on forever and a right hand that ended careers. In 1984, Hearns stopped Duran in 2 rounds and made it look almost easy. A lot of people used that result to dismiss Duran at middleweight, but here's what those people missed. Hearns, going into that fight with every physical advantage, was still wary of Roberto Duran. He knew the reputation. He respected what was standing across from him. The knockout showed what happened when a freakish puncher landed clean, but it did not erase the reality of who Duran was. What it shows is that Duran spent his entire career in the ring with monsters. He fought every great fighter who was willing to get in there with him. That takes a different kind of courage. Hearns understood the man he had beaten was not just some faded name. He was Roberto Duran, and that name carried weight that very few fighters in history have ever carried. Number 8 is George Foreman. George Foreman came back to boxing after 10 years away and won the heavyweight title at 45 years old. He knew something about old fire. When Foreman talked about longevity, he talked about Roberto Duran. There was a phrase that followed Duran through his late career. The wind is old, but it keeps blowing. That was the entire late career story in one sentence. His body aged, the youth faded, but the craft never left. Foreman saw that clearly because he had lived it himself. He cited Duran as the prime example of the old guard staying relevant, not through raw physical ability, but through superior skill and ring intelligence. When your legs slow down, your brain has to speed up. Duran's brain was always fast. It got faster as he aged because he had solved every puzzle the sport had ever thrown at him. Foreman, a man who understood what it felt like to shock the world at an age when everyone had counted you out, had nothing but deep respect for what Duran kept doing decade after decade. Number 7 is Floyd Mayweather. Floyd Mayweather spent his career telling the world he was the greatest. He was right most of the time. But when the conversation turned to Roberto Duran, Mayweather acknowledged something he rarely acknowledged about anyone. He acknowledged a real problem. Analysts who studied both fighters said a prime Duran at lightweight would have been an almost impossible puzzle for Mayweather. The reason is clean and simple. Mayweather thrived on distance. He used his shoulder roll and his lateral movement to stay out of range and counter safely. Duran did the exact opposite. Duran wanted to be close, so close that you could not move properly. He used what became known as sticky hands. He kept constant physical contact with your forearms and gloves. He felt where you were going before you fully committed. He pinned your lead hand down, and the moment that guard dropped, he was already throwing a short hook or uppercut from 6 inches away. Mayweather's system was built on not getting close to that. Duran's system was built on making sure you could not avoid it. Mayweather respected Duran's ability to bully opponents without ever losing technical precision. That combination of physical pressure and a sharp mind is the hardest thing in boxing to neutralize. Number 6 is Ray Arcel. Ray Arcel trained champions from the 1920s through the 1980s. He had seen more boxing than any man alive. When he began working with Roberto Duran, he saw something he had never quite encountered before. He called it a sixth sense, not the punching power, not the aggression, the sixth sense, the ability to feel the ring, to know instinctively where to stand, when to slip, when to counter, all of it happening below conscious thought. Arcel said this was something you could not teach. You either had it or you did not. Duran had it in a way that felt almost unnatural. Arcel described himself as the calm yin to Duran's impetuous yang. His job was not to build Duran from scratch. His job was to focus the energy, to ensure the power was delivered efficiently, to sharpen the jab, to add structure around the raw instincts. He took a man from the streets of Panama who fought with pure fury and helped turn him into an operator who could outthink brilliant minds like Leonard inside the pocket. The partnership was the foundation of Duran's middle career success. Without Arcel's steady hand, the fire burned without direction. With it, that fire became a precision weapon. Number 5 is Iran Barkley. Iran Barkley was called the Blade. He was a powerful middleweight who had done something almost nobody could do. He had knocked out Thomas Hearns, the same Hearns who had stopped Duran 5 years earlier. So when Barkley and Duran were matched in 1989, nobody gave Duran any realistic chance. He was 37 years old. It was 37 years. A natural lightweight against a legitimate middleweight who had just destroyed one of the most dangerous punchers alive. The prediction was simple. Barkley would overwhelm him early. What actually happened was the opposite. Duran came in relaxed. He let Barkley work in the early rounds. He watched. He noticed Barkley was growing comfortable with his jab, predictable with it, and then Duran began timing it. He started loading a counter right hand over the top of that jab. Round after round, the adjustment sharpened. In the 11th, he landed it clean and sent Barkley down. That knockdown shifted everything. In the 12th, Barkley came hunting desperately, and Duran's head movement carried him through every attempt. Barkley could not land clean enough to stop him. Number 4 is Vinny Pazienza. Vinny Pazienza had heart like very few fighters ever did. He came back from a broken neck. He fought Roy Jones Jr. He was not a man who scared easily. So when Pazienza said what he said about Roberto Duran, it carried real weight. He said nobody in his entire career hit him as hard as Duran did. Not Roy Jones. Not anyone. Was not after a long, sustained beating. It was the very first punch Duran landed. One shot, and Pazienza immediately had second thoughts about being in that ring. He actually won both of their fights, but he never forgot that power. He described it as singular, something he had simply never felt from any other human being. And this was a Duran in his mid-40s. The hands that had made everyone flinch during his prime still had the exact same effect decades later. That is not just punching power, that is something in the bones. Something in the violence that had lived inside him since he was a barefoot kid in Panama fighting for his survival. The hands of stone were never just a nickname. They were a documented physical fact. Number 3 is Marvin Hagler. Marvin Hagler was terrifying. He had been undefeated for 11 years when Duran challenged him for the undisputed middleweight title in November 1983. Hagler was a southpaw destroyer fighting at his natural weight class against a man whose natural fighting weight was 135 pounds, a full 25 pounds lighter. Everyone expected a quick, brutal night for Duran. What they got was 15 rounds of chess that nobody in the building expected. Hagler admitted after the fight that he went in tight, not scared, but deeply aware of Duran's danger at every moment. He said he could not land the shots he wanted because Duran was too crafty, too skilled at slipping his head off the line just before a big punch arrived. Duran led on 2 of the 3 scorecards going into the 13th round. He went the full 15 rounds with the most feared middleweight alive and ended Hagler's knockout streak in world championship bouts. After the decision, Hagler looked at the press and said something that told the entire story. He said he had beaten a legend and needed them to give him credit. That is not what a champion says after an easy night. That is what a man says when he has been tested to his absolute limit by a smaller fighter and barely survived. Duran had done that to one of the most fearsome champions in boxing history. Number 2 is Sugar Ray Leonard. Sugar Ray Leonard was everything Roberto Duran was not supposed to be afraid of. He was fast. He was slick. He had a reach advantage. He had never lost a professional fight. He was the golden boy of his era. And on June 20th, 1980 in Montreal, Duran took everything Leonard had built and broke it down systematically. The attack started before the opening bell. Duran used the build-up to get deep into Leonard's head. He used insults and personal provocations to pull Leonard away from his own game plan. Leonard later admitted that Duran got completely under his skin and made him abandon the outside boxing that had defined his entire career. Instead of staying at range and using his speed, Leonard fought flat-footed in the trenches, exactly where Duran lived and breathed. Leonard described the punishment in that fight as making him feel close to death, and through all of it, Duran was not just brawling in the chaos. He was slipping Leonard's legendary jabs with subtle head movement. He was using feints to destroy Leonard's timing and punish him when he reacted wrong. By feinting a level change and then countering with a looping hook, Duran used Leonard's own expectations against him. Number 1 is Mike Tyson. When Mike Tyson calls someone his soulmate, that means everything. Tyson was the most feared man on the planet. He made grown men look for reasons not to fight him. He was Kid Dynamite, the youngest heavyweight champion in history, and the one fighter who lit his original fire, the one man who first showed him what real ferocity looked like, was Roberto Duran. Tyson said Duran carried an animalistic intent in the ring that became the direct blueprint for his own emergence. Duran himself once described it simply. He was a gentleman in private life, a loving man outside the ropes, but when that first bell rang, something else took over. An animal that did not stop until the last bell. That is exactly what Tyson recognized and loved. Their bond became concrete during Tyson's preparations for the Michael Spinks fight in Atlantic City. Tyson went to Duran and asked him directly, what was the most efficient way to finish Spinks? Duran told him to go to the body without hesitation. Break the body, break the will. Tyson executed it and destroyed Spinks in 91 seconds with a devastating left hook to the midsection. He came back to the dressing room and told Duran directly that he had followed his exact plan. That moment was not just two fighters talking. It was the passing of very specific, very dark knowledge about how to dismantle a human being from the inside out. Tyson's obsession with Duran had started years earlier. At 16 years old, standing in the gallery at Madison Square Garden during the Davey Moore fight in 1983, shadowboxing alone and screaming Duran's name out loud. He was not watching a boxer, he was watching a force of nature, a man who had grown up with nothing in Panama, who once swam across a bay with a bag of mangoes clenched in his teeth just to feed his family, and who turned that lifetime of hunger into the most terrifying and intelligent ring presence the lightweight division had ever seen. The feral stare, the animal switch, the sticky hands, the sixth sense, the power that lasted into his 40s. That was the origin of the animal, and it never fully left him. Roberto Duran scored knockouts or stoppages in 14 of boxing's 15 possible rounds. Only the 9th round is missing from his tally. He competed across 5 full decades and became the first Latin American 4-division world champion. His career began in the late 1960s and did not end until the early 2000s. The sticky hands technique he mastered inside the pocket has not been replicated at the elite level since he retired. And the men who stood across from him, the men who hit the hardest and thought the fastest and understood this sport at its deepest levels, those are the ones who told us exactly how special he was. Bert Sugar called him a technical brawler and a complete fighter. Hagler pleaded for credit just for beating him. Tyson called him a soulmate and followed his advice to win the biggest fight of his career. That is the real story of Roberto Duran. Not 2 words. Not one bad night. A lifetime of terrifying greatness in a sport full of greats. Duran himself said it best. He was not God, but he was something similar. If you truly enjoyed this video, hit that like button and subscribe right now. Drop a comment below and tell us who you think is the hardest puncher in boxing history. We read every single one.